Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of An Astrologer's Calling, where we chat to your favorite and inspirational astrologers about what called them into astrology and how they ended up doing what they do. So today I'm really excited to introduce an astrologer the whole community is deeply appreciative of, and that's Philip Graves. And Philip's dedication to astrology and preserving its history is without question because Philip is an astrological historian and archivist, and he keeps the International Astroloarn Astrology and the AA archive, which is a physical and online archive. And it's so important that astrological books and the history is referenced and cared for. And what I find fascinating, and I just discovered this the other day, Philip is the great nephew of the English author and poet Robert Graves and son of the biographer and poet Richard Percival Graves. So no wonder books are in his blood. But Philip himself is also a writer with many, many essays and articles published. He's the author of Technical and Planetary Developments in Astrology, and I'm going to get a copy of that at the AA conference if I can next month. And Philip, of course, also lectures and talks at conferences. So I don't think I've done him justice there, perhaps, with what I said. So let's just jump in and listen to Philip himself. So, Philip, how did astrology find you, or how did you find astrology?
Hi, Leanne. Well, first of all, thank you very much for that extremely generous introduction. I think you did more than justice to me and to my work in astrology. So that's I'm most grateful for that. Thank you. Well, I found astrology originally, well, I could say at a very low level. It was around in my childhood, and I think many British astrologers can probably relate to this when I say that if you grew up in the 1980s, whether you were a child as I was then or grown up,
Yeah.
and there was a lot of astrology in the media, and it was more sun sign astrology. So we had Russell Grant doing his daily forecast. I don't remember if it was on TV AM in the
Yeah, yeah,
early to mid
well,
80s, something like that anyway.
yeah,
And then we had the launch of the Today newspaper. And I remember the very first issue, everybody was excited about it because until then, newspapers had been virtually entirely printed in black and white. And Today had come up with a cheaper printing process for color printing. And so they promised to have a lot of color pictures. Everybody was very excited about it. And from the very beginning, they had hired a young astrologer called Jonathan Kaner to write these daily forecasts, and Kaner became an institution. His forecasts managed to speak psychologically to
yeah,
people in such a way that they really felt that he was talking to them in a meaningful, personal way, even when he was actually talking about their whole sun sign. And I remember boys at school who, everybody was learning science at school. So, and it was also, I was at a school which was quite a Christian school as well. You had chapel services and so on. So you would have thought people perhaps wouldn't be that warm about astrology. But I remember boys in break time coming up and reading the Cana forecast for the day and just being absolutely absorbed by it. So that was really my earliest introduction. But I didn't take it that seriously until quite a lot later when I stumbled on a copy, a second-hand copy actually. It was in a little holiday let my mum took me to just before my second year at university in Hull. So it was in Yorkshire. We were kind of touring around North Yorkshire, just seeing a few interesting places like Whitby, where the kind of lovely coast and so on. And we stopped at this little holiday let, and on the coffee table there was a copy of Linda Goodman's Love Signs. And because we had nothing else to do in the evenings except watch TV, which I didn't particularly want to do, I started reading it, and I was absolutely absorbed because when I was reading the theoretical interactions of the sun signs with each other, and I was thinking in terms of just people I knew really well, my family, my close friends, perhaps one or two love interests of the past, even, I could just so relate. I mean, it was as if she was injecting psychological realism in a way that made me sit up and question reality, the reality I thought I knew. I was brought up in the kind of modern and scientific worldview with physics lessons at school, which have you kind of believing, well, perhaps determinism has some validity as a philosophical perspective, because if you take the Newtonian view that particles are constantly colliding with each other all the time with predictable momentum and velocity, um, you could come to the reasonable deduction that perhaps everything is predetermined, but actually it it's and as far as astrology is concerned, there seemed to be no obvious way that this would play in, because the planets are so distant that in terms of conventional physics, you would have thought that gravity, for example, would be too small at that distance to have an effect. So I was just astonished, but I thought, well, perhaps the sun is something substantial, and it might realistically have an effect, and perhaps the moon too. But when I took my studies to the next level of actually looking at the complete birth chart, which I did in 1995, which was exactly a year later, I was then surprised again to find that readings given for the conjunctions and aspects of the planets at birth also seem to be meaningful. So I've just never really stopped studying since. And for the first several years, I intensively studied from a practical perspective natal astrology. I tested it out on my family, on friends, on teachers I encountered when I was spending my year abroad in France that year, which was 1995 to 6, before my final year at university. So I met lots of assistants of German and English, and some of the German assistants were actually a bit interested in astrology. So they would come round and would have kind of evening sessions where we'd discuss the sun signs and read bits of Linda Goodman together and so on. It was great fun. And then a few years later, in 2000, I got on the internet with my own little dial-up connection through line1.net, as it was then, one of these early, now long extinct ISPs that we used to have in the UK. And I discovered a whole lot of books which I hadn't been able to obtain from the local bookshops in the UK on astrology. That way, for instance, I started to buy some of the Acela publications, which was still available new in the early 2000s. And I started to buy books from David Roel of astroamerica.com internationally, which were my first international purchases. And I had to actually specially get a credit card for that, because I had no credit card, and you couldn't, there wasn't really PayPal at that time. You had to have a credit card. So I didn't really want a credit card because I didn't want to get into debt. But I thought, for the purpose of ordering these books, I thought it was worth it. So I got one with a very low credit limit from my local bank. And then I also connected with John Ballantrae of Ballantrae Reprint, who was reprinting a whole lot of sort of classic books from the 17th and 19th and early 20th centuries that a collector he knew in Canada had collected originals of. And they had arrangement that he would then photocopy them and clean up the photocopies and bind them with these kind of what they call comb bind plastic bindings, which are very, very sturdy and solid, and they kind of last forever as long as the plastic doesn't disintegrate. And so far, it's been very good. I bought these in the early 2000s, and they're still almost like new. So I then that way I got more into the history of astrology, because I realized that there was a lot more than just 20th century astrology, and that the techniques had changed and varied. And in 2001, late 2001, I was invited by an American man who ran a small community called Horoscopes Chat on the MSN Groups network to join his group. And I was already a part of an associated chat room at that time on the MSN network, MSN Chat Service it was called, and it lasted until 2003, before they had various kind of child safety concerns which caused them to pull the plug on the whole service. But it was a very thriving chat room for those years. And so that was my way into the online um, astrology community. And I was offered a position as assistant manager in that community right at the end of 2001. and eventually was promoted to joint manager. And I started to develop the community with resources. So it was more than just forums, message boards, people posting their photo albums. I actually started writing articles on particular astrological topics using the books I collected, and that inspired me to collect more books. So I thought to have really good quality information on all these topics, I need more sources. So by early 2004, I had 300 books, whereas I'd started with just 60 when I joined that community. So that's how I got into it. That's probably a longer answer than you needed, Leanne, but I hope that gives you a
No,
clear picture.
no, it's absolutely fascinating. It really is. So it's a vocation,
Well,
isn't it?
it's become one, yes, because
Yeah,
I mean, to be honest, when I first got into that community in 2001, I was very committed to a career in popular music. I had been busily writing and self-producing my own songs. I had just attended college at Western-super-Mare to study sound engineering for a year from 2000 to 2001 to improve my techniques. And I really wanted to do that. But when I met this community of people, I just felt they were my people, that I really related to their worldview. I felt at home with them. I thought, well, actually, perhaps this is where I belong more. So I kind of shelved the whole music project at that stage. And I've really never stopped being involved with the astrological community online
yeah.
since 2001.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And I've been talking to another astrologer in a separate episode,
Mhm.
and we were discussing the connections that you make in the astrological community and how
Yeah,
you forge these just forever connections, and you end up working with these people, and they sort of alter the course of your life almost, the connections you make. And
yeah,
we were talking specifics about, when you meet people at in-person conferences like the AA conference, for example, and you just
yes,
form these astrological bonds that go beyond just being an acquaintance. Yeah,
yeah. I totally agree. And I think that is partly a natural phenomenon that happens because when you've studied astrology, it's almost as though you've passed through a selection, a self-selecting filter that only people who have a certain mindset that they will be very interested in the
yeah,
intricacies of things such as inner psychology and destiny are going to study these to an advanced level anyway. So anybody who has done that, they are likely to be able to relate to you at a deeper
yeah,
level than an average person you would meet in a practical work or
yeah.
everyday neighborly situation, which is not to say anything against those kinds
No,
of contacts too. I think neighbors are great. I think the sense of community that people used to have perhaps more in the past and still do to an extent is something which should not be dismissed. I love talking to my neighbors. Just the other day, I was going down my street and I was recognized by an elderly lady who lives further down the street, and she stopped me and we had a good chat for about 15 minutes. And these kind of things are wonderful because you bond over common humanity. But I think with astrologers, there's something extra because of that shared level of understanding.
yeah, yeah. You're absolutely right there, and I think there's an acceptance as well because we understand that we all have our astrological makeups, and I
Yeah.
think therefore I don't know if this is the right word or not. There's a certain degree of tolerance or just
Mm-hmm.
insight into the way people think, react, speak, integrate, because that's the way they are. And it's not to say that you're going to get on with everyone, because we all have synastry, and some synastry is great and some's a little bit more challenging. And we're all humans at the end of the day. But
Yeah.
I think we have that insight into each other that gives us that, like you say, that deeper level of understanding of how we all tick and how we all resonate together. Yeah. An appreciation of each other's differences, even.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right on the point about tolerance. I think if you do study astrology, then rationally you should become more tolerant than you
Yeah.
were, if in any way you were intolerant of personal differences
Yeah.
and perhaps quick to pass judgment, you should become more tolerant in the understanding that, to some extent at least, people can't help being who they are. Now, obviously, there is still a place for moral judgment. Everybody has choices,
Yeah.
and you can have a certain astrological makeup that has very powerful energies and drives in certain areas, but you don't have to use those for criminality. You
Hmm.
can rise above that
Yeah.
temptation and transcend those energies and express them in a more positive
Yeah.
and productive way. So I think that's a very important lesson you get from astrology.
Yeah, yeah. So really, in theory, as astrologers, with the personal insight we have, we should all be operating at a higher vibration of our
Yes,
planetary placements. But as I said, we're all in different, cycles of our lives and different points of evolution, aren't we? And we're only human.
you're absolutely
So it's quite normal for the less positive traits of certain placements to manifest, We're all just on
yes.
the journey.
Well, you're absolutely right, Jan, of course.
Yeah.
And of course, also within a profession, I think within any profession where people are actively engaged and they have an interest in earning a living, there's also a kind of natural tendency for there to be a certain amount of competition as well. And so I think another important thing for astrologers is to choose the higher path of being mutually supportive of their colleagues and not trying to um, put each other down for their own self promotion at each other's expense, which is a kind of lower vibrational
Yeah.
response to market forces of competition within a profession.
Yeah.
I think it's great when we can all support each other and help to promote each other's work in a positive, constructive manner that's a kind of win-win for everybody. But that, there have been situations in which people have had strong rivalries within astrology, and there are sort of legends of how people who worked for different astrological publishers or software companies sort of fell out with each other back in the 1980s, and sort of took 20 years to finally um, make up at UAC, kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
a whole cycle later.
Yeah, I think we've all witnessed similar scenarios, and they sort of still go on as well. But we should all be supporting each other and coming together as an astrological community. And
Yes,
Tanya Daniels and I were talking about that because we come from polar opposites. So Tanya's very traditional
yeah,
and I'm very modern, but we completely and utterly respect each other's work. And all our work, it's all valid, it all has its own place. And
yeah.
I just think even if you don't get a certain branch of astrology, you can at least offer a level of respect for it. And we should all be promoting each other and supporting each other. Yeah, simple as that.
I agree. I think at the end of the day, astrologers have far more in common in
Yeah,
terms of their outlook, their interests
yeah,
with each other than they do with the skeptical world that
mm,
rejects astrology. And we have to support each other and stand strong as a
yeah,
community
yeah.
in order to remain viable against all these negative
Skeptic.
pressures
Yeah,
of rejection of astrology, which come
yeah.
from the scientific community, from the organized skeptical community that's been a powerful factor since the 70s, and also to some extent also from portions of the religious communities.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And if all they're seeing is infighting within the astrological community and claims
Yeah.
if that system doesn't work, mine's the only system that works, it doesn't do astrology as a whole any good.
No. And one of the things, because I suppose because I started with learning modern astrology and I'd already studied about 50 plus books before I looked at any source from before 1900. Well, actually, from before 1898, I should say, because I did get a copy of a reprint of Safarial's Manual of Astrology very early on, and because it was one of the books that Linda Goodman recommended, but that was actually originally from 1898, but the reprint was from 1962 and had Pluto added, so it wasn't quite the same, but it was still based on Safarial's work.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, because I then went into looking at traditional sources, I've seen it from both sides, and I really respect the sincere intellectual effort that has gone into studying astrology from different perspectives. And I've met and made friends with spiritually focused astrologers too,
Yeah.
evolutionary astrologers, karmic astrologers, and I totally respect their work as well.
Yeah.
And that again, that's different from modern astrology because it's a less sort of technical nuts and bolts approach. It is more focused specifically on the soul and to some extent on the idea of karma and past
Yeah.
lives. And so that's again is a very, you have to have a particular worldview to even accept that as valid, and not all astrologers do. But even if you don't believe in past lives, you can still acknowledge that the work these astrologers are doing is completely sincere, and that
Yeah.
within a certain intellectual framework, it is completely valid.
Yeah, and very useful as well. So, when I'm working with my students, I'm always, because straight away they'll look at the nodal axes, for example, and go,
Yeah,
"Oh, it's all about karma." And I'm like, "Okay, if you're a modern psychological astrologer, you have to
yeah,
accept that not everyone believes in karma or past
right.
lives.
Yeah,
It's a belief system." However, the nodes can be used to describe the karma and past lives if someone subscribes to that model, but the nodes can also be used to describe one's personal evolution and growth through life. And both are equally valid. They're both equally valid and very, very valuable.
yes, I agree. And another thing I would say about that is that one of my favorite early books that I got before I studied traditional astrology was Spiritual Astrology by Jan Spiller and Karen
Mhm.
McCoy.
Love it. Yeah.
And I absolutely loved Karen McCoy's past life readings
Yeah.
that she connects to the prenatal eclipses. And I thought, well, even though at that time I certainly was a little bit skeptical about the idea of past lives, I thought, well, actually, these readings are so psychologically insightful that you
Yeah.
don't have to believe literally
Absolutely.
in past lives to see that they are saying something meaningful from the point of view of the psyche of the person with this
Yeah.
placement.
Yeah.
So there are different ways that you can approach the reading. It doesn't have to be a completely literal reading, just as Christians don't have to believe in the literal truth of every word of the Old Testament to
Yeah.
gain valuable lessons from it.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, that's very insightful, Philip. I think people will be really inspired by what you've just said there.
Thank you.
So what would you say astrology's brought to you actually on a personal level? You've probably touched on some of that in everything you've just said, to be fair.
It's definitely brought me a deeper understanding of other people and their differences and how they are and why they are how they are. And it's also certainly brought me a wonderful uh, web of community connections. Many, if not most, of my closest friends are astrologers. I wouldn't say all because I do have some very good friends I've made through other connections, such as when I was out in Sweden learning Swedish, and I was mixing with other immigrants to Sweden for a number of years, and they all had fascinating backgrounds and their own stories to tell, and they were just wonderful people, and I'm still in touch with them, most of them, today, even though I left Sweden in 2016. So, it's not the only route to friendship, but if you are interested in astrology, you can make very good friends that way, and friends who, on the whole, will stay with you for the whole of your life. So that's a wonderful thing about it. I've also as you mentioned at the beginning, I've become a serious student of the history of astrology. So, over the course of collecting, I should take my story that I brought up in response to one of your earlier questions forward a bit, because from 2004, when I actually moved out to Sweden, I came to the decision at that point that the work I had been doing for the community I was involved with online, the Emerson Groups community, at that time in gathering sources and writing from the perspective of multiple sources on particular astrological topics, I decided that could be taken forward as a more serious research project if I collected more books from all periods of astrological history. And so that was the beginning of turning what had been a personal collection into the library I have today, with 10,000 plus books and 14,000 issues of periodicals. So it's become a sort of monster in its own way, but it's a monster which is also well organized and tame, and people are making use of that. Researchers making use of that. I've actually had academic researchers with PhDs visit from the Netherlands and from the USA to stay in Newport, where I live, and visit over multiple days to do research towards their next books. So I've actually found that the resource I've been developing is helping to advance the history of astrology in itself. I've
Yeah,
also, as you mentioned, written my own essays, particularly since 2016. I've had essays published in astrological magazines, and I've also spoken at conferences, international conferences, since 2017, on and off. I don't always get picked, but I do sometimes, and I hope to speak at more of those in the future. And I think that has become part of my career now, um, researching and writing on the history of astrology. And the first volume, which you mentioned, Technical and Planetary Develops in Astrology, is just the first of a projected 4 volumes. And I've already written most of the material for those. I just need to finish it up, the other
yeah,
volumes, that is, with a few additional essays. And that's going to be, a whole series of
yeah,
original studies from primary sources, not from secondary sources, on the history of astrology, which is going to further people's understanding of how astrology has developed throughout history. So, but on a personal level, it's become a part of my life path and my career, as well as just a kind
yeah.
of um, a worldview and a means to connect with other like-minded people.
Yeah, wow. Wow. I mean, you've got this wonderful library and archive, which is a incredible resource, but you are a resource in yourself. Because I remember a year or two ago, I was preparing for a talk and I had a question. I think it was, I wanted to know when the first ever astrological book was printed by the printing press.
Yes.
And I couldn't find it anywhere on the internet. And someone suggested I get in touch with you, and you came straight back with some suggestions. So
Yeah.
I haven't forgot that. I was so grateful for that because obviously your knowledge is just
So
on.
it's a combination. I think over the course of developing a library from scratch, you have to learn things. You have to learn. You have to look up sources and library records to discover when different editions have been published. So you do
Mm,
gradually pick up knowledge that way. But it's also partly, if people come to me with questions, if I don't know the answers, and I won't in all cases because there's so much printed information on astrology. People sometimes ask me, "Do you read all the books you get?" And of course, the answer is no. That's absolutely impossible. There are 10,000 books, 14,000 issues of journals. You would need more than a lifetime. Somebody would need to pay you a maintenance income to be able to do that.
Yeah,
But you dip into them as and when there's something relevant that calls for
yeah,
research, so they're available. And so it's partly just having the resources available so that if you don't know the answer, you can look it up. And people do sometimes come to me with research issues where I can help them, and people consult me, and sometimes they pay me for scans of old out of copyright materials on a sort of private commission basis. So I can help researchers, I can help
yeah,
astrologers professional astrologers and people who are writing books to identify and use sources of relevance that will give their work a stronger sense of academic
Yeah.
um, authority.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fantastic. So tell me about your typical working day, if you have a typical
that's,
working day. Some people do, some people don't.
that's a very good question. I don't really have a typical day. It varies completely depending on current priorities. At the moment, I am doing little bits and pieces. So I'm talking to you today. I'm hoping to spend some time with one of the AA board members visiting here tomorrow. I won't mention their name in advance, just in case it's a security risk for them. But um, I do bits and pieces of networking like that. I do a lot of routine work related to the library, which isn't paid, and that's just buying in books, cataloging them. I also do quite a lot of work related to my secondhand astrological bookshop that I started only in May 2024, which now has about 2,000 listings online. Some of them are individual old issues of journals, but there are probably 1,400 to 1,500 books um, available. So that's a kind of a way of keeping a bit of turnover at the moment. I do also do some freelance work for my former employer in Bristol, and that's a web design agency my elder brother runs. I used to work almost full time for that for several years when I came back from Sweden in 2016. And I made the conscious decision to quit my employee role just over a year ago so that I could devote the rest of my career to astrology
Mm.
singularly and have more time for that and also have less stress.
Yeah.
But I still do 1 day a week because it's useful maintenance income that
Yeah.
ensures that
Yeah.
even if I don't sell any books for a month, which is possible,
Yeah.
even if I don't have any research commissions for a month, I can still pay my household bills and not
Yeah.
go under and have debt collectors coming in to seize all books, which would be a
Yeah. Yeah.
disaster. So
Yeah.
it's totally variable.
Yeah, yeah, it's fascinating, but it's almost like being master of your own destiny, isn't it?
Well,
Yeah,
yes, that's wonderful. I'd much rather have a low income that occasionally has surges when
yeah,
things do well, but be free and relaxed and
yeah,
doing something which is meaningful to me, and
yeah,
to have a moderately high income, but be stressed and feel I'm wasting my life by doing things that other
yeah,
people could do and that aren't using my unique areas of
yeah,
knowledge and capability.
yeah, yeah. That's a lovely way to live life. It really is. Yeah.
And I'm sure you're very happy to be a professional astrologer yourself, Leanne.
Well, it's not so different. It's not so different. It is about being master of your own destiny, isn't
Yes.
it? And it goes up and down and up and down. But
Yeah.
yeah, I couldn't, well, I have worked in the past in the corporate world from a
Yeah.
scientific background, and it just had no soul for me. It
Yeah.
was soulless. It was
I
well
totally
paid,
yeah.
and no, no.
I totally relate to that. For me, I mean, although I have a second-hand shop, I think of that in terms of, well, on the one hand, I'm offering a service to astrologers
Yeah,
who are getting their hands on out-of-print books, which are quite difficult to find otherwise. So that makes me feel a sort of sense of satisfaction that I'm helping other astrologers in the community. So even though obviously there's money involved, it doesn't feel soulless. Whereas the corporate world in general, um, ultimately you are serving shareholders, company directors, and obviously, they're people, they have families to support too, so that's fine, but it's not so meaningful, is it?
no. No, it's not. It's really not. There's a feeling of being like a slave almost, even though you're getting
Mm,
paid. It's just
mm,
and turning up to work and doing that sort of 9 to 5 or whatever that, Monday to Friday. Oh,
mm.
so confining. And
Yeah,
I that's one of the things I felt very, very trapped in that kind of schedule. And I just love the freedom of making up my own schedule. And trust me, it's very structured. I have to be structured
yes,
to manage my workload, but I can play with it. I can you sort of fit things around how I want to around family life. So yeah, I wouldn't swap that for sure. So, do you have any sort of words of wisdom on the current astro weather, or just any sort of words of wisdom to share with anyone regarding astrology?
not on the current astro weather because I'm much more specialized in history these days. I'm more focused in my kind of ongoing everyday research on literary sources. So I'm not even as frequent as I used to. Certainly, I'm not even looking at the current astro weather as
Yeah.
much as I used to. So I kind of read what people who are following that say online, but I'm not looking at that closely. So no, not on that one. But in terms of wisdom regarding astrology, well, I would say that for the younger astrologers, or not necessarily younger, but people who are getting into astrology at a fairly early stage of their studies, and that could be at any age, of course. You could have retired from a career and decide to be learning astrology in your
Mhm.
retirement, which is a totally valid approach as well. Um, I think be aware that there are different schools of astrology, and they all have their own validity, as we were saying earlier. And people who are advocates of some may sometimes disrespect the others, but I think it pays to keep an open mind and to be aware that there is wisdom to be found in all schools if you look for it with an open mind. But it does probably pay, at least if you're going to do astrology at a practical level of actually analyzing and reading charts and reading for people, to specialize in one area so that you have a solid working structure, and you're using a consistent methodology that you can then apply with rigor to read for people. Because I think there is a risk that if you go down the route that I've gone down of studying a bit of everything, it becomes harder to give a focused reading on a practical level for an individual because you're being pulled at by from different sides by all these different methods, and you're kind of thinking, well, should I use this method, should I use that method, and that
Yeah,
doesn't work practically.
yeah,
So that really is only sensible for a little bit of background reading, perhaps just to kind of broaden your understanding. And also, if you're a historian, you have to study a bit of everything, as I do. But I would say find an area that resonates with you,
yeah,
um, learn that really well, get all the sources you can, all the printed sources, so you're well read. Don't rely on internet sources alone because they will be very secondhand, often third hand. And
yeah,
there's even a risk nowadays that articles you read on people's websites will have been processed through an AI
yeah,
routine,
yeah,
which means that they are at best dubious in
yeah,
terms of the accuracy of the information because AI makes stuff up and it just reprocesses articles it finds that appear to be relevant to the subject
yeah,
elsewhere.
yeah,
So it's much better to use printed books and preferably printed books with a bit of age within the subject area. I mean, obviously, new books are wonderful too, but if, for instance, you're researching evolutionary astrology, why not start with the earliest books on the topic from the 1980s, such as Jeff Green's books on Pluto and Uranus, and then you kind of understand where it came from,
mhm,
and you can kind of take it forward from there and gradually work in other sources that have been published since then to deepen your understanding.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. yeah, I think it's about building solid foundations.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's so important. And I always say a little knowledge is a dangerous thing.
Mm.
So yeah, I think those really solid foundations that will carry you through are important. And then you can start, thinking about other techniques or other schools of thoughts. But yeah, I think it has to be built from the bottom up, that level of knowledge. Yeah.
Definitely, and also practice is so important as well.
Yeah.
Whatever, however
Yeah.
much you read, until you've actually tested these techniques out on
Yeah.
dozens of charts, you won't really understand how they work in practice and be able to apply that experience to reading for
Yeah.
people in a meaningful way. I think we can probably all relate to the experience at an early stage of studies of just using the printed delineations in a book as a guide, in a single book perhaps to begin with, as a guideline for reading for people. And I was certainly doing that when I was out in France.
Yeah.
In my first year of studies, I was reading bits from Life, Love, and Destiny by Barbara Dunn, my friend Barbara Dunn and Archie Dunlop, um, and also bits from Linda Goodman's Sun Signs,
Yeah.
because that was all I had. But that's we all begin that way. But I
Yeah,
think
of course.
you need to study numerous charts and test techniques out to kind of refine your understanding of how it works, and then you can get to a stage of actually being able to read without the help of pre-printed
Yes.
delineations.
Yeah. Yeah. And that can take years sometimes. It
Absolutely.
can take years. And I think people are in too much of a rush to, get to that stage. But on the other hand, I think it's important. There comes a point, and most people know when they're at that stage, you need to
Mm,
put the books away
mm,
and trust in your own insight. But yeah,
yes.
that, comes at varying points for different people. And it's often a gradual process.
Yeah.
It can be a gradual process, but I'd never be without my books. And even now, sometimes I'll be thinking about something or looking at a chart, and I just need a little bit of inspiration. So I'm like, right, yes, I'll pick up that one because it's tried and tested, and you just need that little bit of insight sometimes. Yeah.
Absolutely. And another thing to mention here is that when you go beyond what are called the cookbook
Mm.
delineations,
Yeah.
and you can learn a lot by looking at detailed analysis of individual chart factors in isolation, such as the individual planets, their natures, what they stand for, the individual signs, the aspects, and then you learn to synthesize
Yeah.
how those factors work in combination with each other over
Mm.
time. So, for instance, I think one book that used to be recommended to people who wanted to go beyond basic astrology to become intermediate astrologers was Horoscope Symbols by Robert Hand, because
Yeah.
he looks in detail at the essential nature of the individual factors without giving you potted delineation. So
Yeah.
that kind of teaches you the skill of thinking for yourself at
Yeah.
combining those symbols.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. It's a very important thing to, while you're learning, um, grow that being able to think for yourself and not just
Yes,
rely on everything that's written down there. It takes a certain level of confidence to do that. And like I was saying, it comes with time.
yeah,
Everyone's journey with this is different,
yes. And
Um,
and and so one other thing I should mention is that there are a lot of very good skilled teachers and astrological teaching schools.
yeah,
I mean, in the UK, for instance, we have the London School of Astrology, we have the
yeah,
Mayo School, just to
yeah,
name two examples.
yeah,
And obviously, if you are into traditional astrology, there are um, alternative options for that as well. I won't name particular names because there are quite a few of those. And psychological astrology, there are things like the Center for Psychological Astrology and the Mercury Internet
yeah,
School of Astrology, for instance. So there are lots of different options. And I think for many people, taking the next step to becoming a professional astrologer, it does pay to actually sit down with structured classes in one of those schools, because that really disciplines you
yeah,
to do the work, and the repetition of exercises
yeah.
and of actually practicing readings, and that will help to hone your skills and give you the
Yeah, yeah.
confidence to go professional in the future.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it always, if you're going professional, it certainly helps to have a recognized qualification.
That's
Without
another thing
that,
too. Yes, yes,
yeah, I went down the Mayo route
yeah,
many years ago, and I can't recognize recommend it highly enough. And I work for the Mayo now as a tutor, so I've been on both sides of the fence, but
yes,
it certainly gave me those incredible foundations which I'd started by myself. I was self-taught initially. So yeah, I totally agree with everything you've said there. And I'm not just doing a PR for the Mayo, but all of those schools you mentioned,
yeah,
they're highly regarded
yes,
worldwide and will provide anyone with a fantastic education. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. So before we finish, because we've been talking for ages, it's been really fascinating, Philip. Have you got any exciting projects or events coming up that you'd like to share?
Let me think. Yes. Well, for the Astrological Association, I've recently been authorized to start converting scans that I took for my own little independent business without in Sweden of a lot of the older books in my collection to a kind of flippable book format. And that will then be offered as an add on option together with AA membership as a kind of digital resource
Yeah.
alongside digitized books from the AA library. So basically, I will be taking the best of both the older books from my collection and the older books from the Astrological Association Library, which also lives with me at the moment
Yeah.
and has done for about the last 3 years. And we will make together a, a resource that you can, if you're logged in as a paid up member, you can access these flippable books. And this is something which is going to be formally announced probably a little bit after this year's AA conference,
Yeah.
because I've still got to do most of the work on actually doing the conversions for that. But we hope to be up and running with 300 or so books by the time of the launch later this autumn. So that will be a kind of uh, good way to access some of the older sources that I have here without physically visiting the library, which is probably much more time efficient and cost efficient
Yeah.
for most
Yeah.
people, because just the cost of travel
Yeah.
to
Mm.
Newport, that's and staying overnight potentially as well, that kind of rules it out for people who don't live within a sort of 2 hour radius, I
Yeah.
would say. And we're hoping to take that forward as a digital resource. And that's been sort of agreed by the A board already. So it's in the very early stages at the moment, but that is something which should be up and running by the end of this year.
Fabulous. Fabulous. Yeah. So that's a great excuse to join the AA as well. You get even more for your membership.
Yes, that there will be an add-on fee for this
Yeah.
because the idea is to make it sustainable. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it won't be a lot, and there might be an alternative of people who aren't AA members of paying a higher membership fee just for the digital library. But the main idea is to have a sort of moderate add-on fee to the AA
Yeah.
membership.
Yeah.
Um, for this. And other projects, I also have my second, third, and fourth volumes of essays to finish up. So I really need to put in a lot of time to get those finished. And I hope most of that will be published by the end of next year, if not before.
Wow. That's a lot of work.
It
That's
is, but
a lot of work.
most of the work's done. It's just
Yeah.
a few essays to finish, and then of course there's the process of I need to get my publisher's time to actually edit and
Yeah.
finalize the publication, and
Yeah.
that can take
Yeah.
months sometimes.
Yeah. 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 It's a long process,
It is.
definitely.
That's right.
So there's lots to look forward to.
I hope so. Yes, should be.
Yeah. And are you going to the AA conference this year?
Yes, I will be, and I'm expecting to be more actively involved on the bookstall this year, together with Jadranka, who is sort of bookstall regular.
Mhm.
She's
Yeah,
managed it
yeah.
for many years, and I'll be bringing up some secondhand books that were donated to the AA library. One of the funny things here is I have to be very careful to keep separate locations for my books and AA's books. They
Yeah.
don't get mixed up. So if people, as they sometimes do, donate books to the AA library, they belong to the AA, and I keep them with all the AA's things. And the AA does get quite a lot of donations that include duplicates of materials it already has, and then the duplicates are integrated into the AA's pre-lab book sales or the conference bookstore.
Yeah.
And so I'll be bringing up quite a few books that were donated within the last 12 months to the conference bookstall, and sitting with Jadranka and
Yeah.
talking to passers-by and just generally um, helping people choose books.
Yeah, well, I'll be there because I always like to come away from the conferences with a few extra books. Definitely,
Wonderful. I
definitely.
look forward to seeing you there, Leanne.
Yeah, definitely. It'd be lovely to have a catch up because you were there 2 years ago. That was the last time I was there, but I was doing a
Yes.
talk and I was helping run the Zooms. So
Ah,
I
so you're
was
very busy.
absolutely run ragged, and then we had so many
Yeah.
technical problems. It was
I
quite
remember,
challenging.
yes. That was at
And
the Staffordshire conference, wasn't
it
it?
was, yeah, and we had it was on top of the solar eclipse, and
Mm,
yeah,
mm,
it was exciting, but yes, it was definitely a little bit stressful. So,
yeah.
but so I'm just doing my talks this time, so hopefully I'll get a bit more time to sort of mingle and
Wonderful. Well,
catch up with
I don't
people.
have talks this year, so I will be free to start the bookstore most of the time, I would hope.
Yeah,
And there'll probably be a kind of rotation where Jadranka starts it sometimes, and I can go off and watch a few lectures,
yeah,
and then I start it,
absolutely,
she goes off and watch a
yeah,
few. So it'll all be fab.
absolutely. So I look forward to catching up with you there next month. Okay,
You too,
thanks
Leanne.
so much. Take care. Take
You
care.
too.
Bye bye.
Bye.